Hello from Gilbert and Tobin. I'm Moya Dodd.
And I'm Matt Rubenstein, and this is The Competitive Edge. What you need to know about competition law in Australia and around the world.
Today, the running man. Dr. Andrew Leigh, Assistant Minister for Productivity, Competition and More, joins us to talk about the revitalised national competition policy, non-competes and unfair trading practices.
We're looking at non-compete clauses, occupational licensing, planning and zoning reforms, and constantly thinking, what are the rules that have acted to gum up the economy and how do we get them reformed and so new businesses can start and thrive and compete with the majors, and we don't just get this ongoing process of consolidation in which monopolies then slow down the rate of growth for the economy.
But first, Matt, The Running Man is a 1982 novel by Stephen King. Not the Productivity Commissioner Stephen King, who we've had on our podcast, but the King of Horror Stephen King, who we've talked about a lot.
That's the one. Though The Running Man was released under the pen name Richard Bachman, which was reportedly after the band Bachman Turner Overdrive.
You ain't seen nothing yet.
No, we ain't. So Stephen King wanted to see if he could still write books that people would read, even if he wasn't Stephen King, which by then, of course, he was.
And could he?
Well, he says he never got the chance to find out, so he wrote 4 Richard Bachman books, which sold pretty well, but not as well as the Stephen King books. And then his cover was blown when a bookseller went to the Library of Congress and found his name in a copyright form.
Something there is that doesn't love a form?
A lot of things there is. The Running Man was filmed in 1987 with Arnold Schwarzenegger, and for some reason Mick Fleetwood playing a rebel musician who was radicalised when the regime burned all of his songs.
Wasn't there also a film with Glenn Powell last year?
There was, and 2025 was also the year where the novel was set, and the year of the merger of Skydance with Paramount, who made the most recent film and who we'll talk about in a minute.
I'm sure we will. So, The Running Man is a kind of game show where the contestants have to run for as long as they can before they're killed.
Basically, yeah. So there's a monopoly on broadcasting, which is held by the network in a kind of public-private partnership. And it's never really clear whether the government's controlling the network or the other way around, or if they've just merged into one while nobody was looking.
Imagine thinking that something like that could have happened in 2025.
I know, it's crazy.
And we know Dr. Leigh is a marathon runner because we had him on the podcast for our episode Marathon Man.
Yeah, we did, but now he's running ultra marathons. And I'll be honest, there is a documentary called Ultramarathon Man about the ultramarathon runner Dean Karnazes, who wrote the book Ultramarathon Man and has trademarked Ultramarathon Man. But I don't think we're going to count that as an Ultramarathon Man movie.
Well, there's an Ultraman movie, though, isn't there?
There is. There's a whole Ultraman phenomenon, which started with a Japanese TV series back in the 60s and now includes a number of movies, most recently Ultraman Rising, which is on Netflix.
Well, this whole segment is feeling like an ultramarathon, frankly. Why don't you just tell us what's been happening around the grounds?
Well, speaking of Netflix, the merger between Paramount Skydance and Warner Brothers Discovery has just been approved by a slew of regulators, including our own ACCC and the New Zealand Commerce Commission, the US Department of Justice, and also the antitrust authorities in Saudi Arabia, Ukraine, Serbia, North Macedonia, and China.
Well, Australia, New Zealand, the US and Saudi all got to the World Cup finals, but the others got knocked out in the qualifiers.
They did. And the ACCC was actually the first agency to make a public decision on that merger, shortly followed by the DOJ.
Oh, looks like the new merger regime is definitely helping with the ACCC's concern that it was only being approached after the mandatory jurisdictions had made their minds up.
Yeah, it does. And here the ACCC has cleared the merger in Phase 1 and has given us quite a detailed decision.
So, as we know, Paramount Skydance is a global media company, perhaps best known to this podcast for the Top Gun franchise, and now for the latest Running Man movie.
Yeah, but also for securing the Australian rights to the major football competitions through to 2028.
Major ones, Matt? Doesn't include the current Men's World Cup then?
Oh, I know what I said, Moya. Paramount's brands include CBS, Nickelodeon, Comedy Central and Showtime, and here in Australia it has the streamer Paramount Plus and the free-to-air Channel 10.
And Warner Brothers we know from the Looney Tunes cartoons, but also from Newline, CNN, Discovery Channel, HBO and HBO Max, formerly HBO Max, and in Australia it's got HBO Max and some pay TV channels.
Yeah, and both studios distribute their movies in Australia either directly or through distributors.
And the ACCC focused on whether the merger would lessen competition in 2 markets.
Yeah, so one was the wholesale supply of films for theatrical release in Australia, where the ACCC found that Paramount, Skydance, Warner Brothers Discovery would face competition from the other majors, so Disney, Sony and Universal, as well as some smaller suppliers.
So are we calling it Parasky Warbro Disco or what?
I think we should. It's a shame that Polly Warner Cracker never happened.
It is. And there was some concern that Parasky Warbro Disco could keep its films on its own streaming platforms rather than releasing them to cinemas. But the ACCC found that probably wouldn't happen.
Yeah, and I think that's right. So some movies will go straight to streaming, but if a studio thinks it's got a big movie on its hands, it's going to put it in the cinemas.
Yeah. Well, the other market was the supply of non-theatrical retail AV services. So basically that's any content supplied to the streamers or the linear TV services, where there was a concern that the merged entity could foreclose its rivals' access to wholesale AV content.
Yeah, and again, the ACCC found that those retail services had a range of alternatives, including other distributors, as well as the abilities to produce or commission their own programming.
So our guest Andrew Leigh has a barbecue game where you have to name Australian industries where there are more than just a couple of dominant players. Sounds like the supply of theatrical films and non-theatrical AV content are among those industries, Matt.
Yeah, and it's a good thing too. The DOJ had a similar analysis, and it found that the merger would actually increase competition across the media and entertainment ecosystem, with benefits for American consumers and workers.
Well, you don't often hear that kind of enthusiasm from a regulator.
You don't. But already, Paramount is arguing that the ACCC's reasoning should apply in other jurisdictions, like Brazil, which they're saying has a competitive landscape that's quite a bit like ours.
Interesting. So another example of the ACCC getting to be more of a leader in these multi-jurisdictional mergers.
Yeah, and I think they'll be happy with that. In the meantime, the European Commission is set to make its decision by the 7th of July, subject to any remedies the parties might offer. And in the UK, the CMA announced its merger inquiry earlier this month, with a Phase 1 decision due by the 7th of August.
So it sounds like this one's getting to the point of, and that's all, folks.
It is looking pretty close now.
All right. What else is going on?
Well, speaking of Australia's influence overseas, the UK has just announced its own social media ban for children under 16, which they're describing as Australia Plus.
Wait, wasn't Australia Plus a short-lived pay TV channel operated by the ABC and broadcast in Southeast Asia?
It was. It was actually launched in 1993 as Australia Television Network. Then it became ABC Asia Pacific, then Australia Network, and Australia Plus for the last 4 years to 2018. So quite long-lived, actually.
Okay. Well, sounds like a great name for a non-theatrical AV content streaming provider.
It does, doesn't it? And back in the UK, the government there means that it'll build on Australia's social media ban with some additional restrictions and obligations.
So, like Australia, they're focused on user-to-user platforms whose purpose is to enable social interaction and which allow users to post material alongside algorithmic content.
Yeah, and like us, they plan to cover platforms like Instagram, YouTube, TikTok, Snapchat, Facebook, and X, but they don't intend to target messaging services like WhatsApp or Signal.
So that's the Australia part. The plus part is they're also going to block what they call harmful functions, such as live streaming and stranger communication with children for under 16s. And those restrictions will apply to a wider range of online services, including on gaming sites.
Yeah, and down the track, they're also looking at overnight curfews and breaks in infinite scrolling for under 18s, and restricting AI romantic companion chatbots for those under 18s as well.
And they're going to introduce more highly effective age assurance measures, which they say will make it harder for children to bypass age checks. Though, like Australia, they're not expecting that all under 16s will be prevented from accessing social media.
No, they're not. And there are a lot of issues you could raise about social media bans in general, and ours in particular, but ours does have a kind of clarity of purpose. It's meant to stop the kind of bullying behaviour or abuse that can arise when anyone can discover you and pick on you online in ways that can be hard to escape.
So there are questions in the UK about why something that's often educational, like YouTube, is banned, and something that could be a lot more nefarious, like Telegram, is allowed.
Yeah, and that's a fair question, but they do raise different concerns, at least with the particular focus we have here in Australia, where it's about people you don't know finding you rather than messaging people that you already know.
And one issue is that social media can help a lot of kids find help and community where they might otherwise struggle.
Yeah, I mean, I relied quite a bit on what passed for social media when I was an under 16, but there was bullying then as well, even if it was only coming at you at like 300 bits per second. So I really hope we can make social media a better place for everyone.
There must be a way. Time for one more?
Well, the ACCC is announcing quite a few enforcement outcomes as we reach the end of the financial year, including a new greenwashing action in the federal court against the Grilled burger chain.
So this is grilled with an apostrophe and then a D at the end. No E. like in Shakespeare.
Yeah, it's actually quite a bit like sonnet number 6, not to be confused with repo number 5, of course. In thee thy summer, ere thou be distilled, with beauty's treasure, ere it be self-killed, be not self-willed, have thee a burger, grilled.
But the ACCC is taking them to court over greenwashing, not crimes against apostrophes.
That's right. This is about Grill's Tree Day Tuesday promotion, which ran from 2021 to 2024.
And you've pronounced that grill apostrophe D apostrophe S, haven't you?
Well, I tried to, and I'm happy to see that the ACCC has as well.
So it has, in its press release and its concise statement.
And under that promotion, Grilled said that for every burger purchased on a Tuesday, it'd donate $1 towards the planting of trees. And the ACCC says that over 5 million burgers were bought on Tuesdays during that period, but only about 4% of them actually qualified for a tree under the terms of the promotion.
Okay, obviously it had to be on a Tuesday and it had to be a burger, although apparently a salad would qualify as well.
It would, but you also had to be a member of Grill's loyalty program, you had to dine in at the restaurant, and you had to order at the front counter and scan your barcode there.
Okay, well that's a few hoops to jump through, but were all those conditions clearly spelled out to the customers?
Well, there were quite a few different posters and social media posts advertising the deals with more or less detail about the conditions. But the ACCC has identified 26 advertisements that it says failed to adequately disclose at least some of the conditions and generally overstated the circumstances in which buying a burger would help a tree.
So the ACCC is saying that consumers were apt to be misled and they were deprived of a right to make an informed decision.
Yeah, and also that the conduct had the capacity to undermine competition and cause harm to Grill's competitors, since Grilled had misleadingly contributed to the perception that it was focused on sustainability, the environment, and contribution to the community, and that put its competitors at a disadvantage.
But they're not arguing a competition law breach, are they?
It looks like it's just the Australian consumer law, but they do always say that consumer law and competition have this symbiotic relationship. And maybe that's especially the case when it comes to things like greenwashing.
So this is interesting because I wonder how many people would deliberately choose Grilled over another burger chain because $1 would go to a tree.
It is hard to tell, and even if the ACCC can prove misleading or deceptive conduct or false or misleading representations, there could still be questions about the harm to consumers and the benefit to Grilled, which then would go to the penalties.
So what does the ACCC have to say in its media release, Matt?
Well, they say, we're certainly not thrilled with Grilled. Competition's chilled, customers unfairly billed, forests not refilled but milled or tilled or even drilled, tears spilled, faith stilled.
Wow, how many apostrophes was that?
A lot.
So, the Federal Court in Victoria is going to look after this one. There's nothing on file yet, but we'll link to it in the show notes.
We sure will.
But Matt, you recently sat down with Dr. Andrew Leigh, who's the Assistant Minister for Productivity and Competition, inter alia, as well as being a massive proponent of the sporting metaphor.
I did. Dr. Leigh had a lot to say about the government's recent competition policy review, the changes to non-compete clauses and unfair training practices that they're introducing, and why he's never run from one end of his electorate to the other.
And this interview was recorded before the Socceroos played the US.
Yeah, we don't need to talk about that anymore.
Let's take a listen.
I'm delighted to be here with Dr. Andrew Leigh, who, of course, is the Assistant Minister for Productivity, Competition, Charities and Treasury, and the federal member for FENA. Dr. Leigh, welcome back to The Competitive Edge.
Thanks, Matt. Great to be back.
So, Dr. Leigh, you were last here in 2023, just before the Matildas began the run that took them to the semi-finals of the World Cup. We're now in the group stage of the lesser-known Men's World Cup. Could you get the Socceroos as far as you got the Tillies?
Well, it's pretty exciting in the Leigh household because my wife's American, and so we're a few days out from the Australia-US match and discussing with the kids whether we need some of the members of the family to be cheering for the American team just to create a bit of more intra-household tension, or whether all of us should just dive in and just back the Aussies. But, you know, remarkable performance against Turkey, so let's see what we can do.
Absolutely. And now FENA is an interesting electorate because most of it's in the ACT, but then you've also got the Jervis Bay territory 200 k's away. First of all, is it Jervis or is it Jarvis?
You nailed it the first time, Jervis Bay, and I have had this point made to me by no less than Mr. Jervis's granddaughter.
There's a Cape Jervis in South Australia too, which I think is named after the same Jervis. So that was my first instinct.
You nailed it. And the notion, of course, is that every capital city needed a port, which is why we have Jervis Bay. And it also contains a military building, which is the backup location for the parliament to sit were anything to prevent us sitting in the nation's capital.
Right. Oh, that leads me to my next question. I know you ran a 100K ultra marathon last year, but you ever had to run from Vienna to Jervis Bay, say to stick up some posters or do some door knocking maybe?
Yes, it's not a very runnable route, unfortunately. Coast to Cozzy takes some nice little trails going through, and there's a capital to coast run as well. But the direct route to Nowra and then down to Jervis Bay is not exactly the sort of road that you'd naturally choose for a trail race. I've got a few ultras this year. I'm doing 300K races, and they're much better done a long way away from roads.
Oh, fair enough. I guess that would be instantly the Andrew Leigh Classic if it were ever to happen. Just in the realm of imagination for a moment, how do you think that experience would compare with the long journey of competition policy in Australia?
Well, I think as runners like to envisage themselves always running, competition reformers should see ourselves as always reforming. It's a bit like the tax code. It's not a set and forget process. It's about ensuring that we've got the right reforms in order to get economic dynamism. You look back to that terrific raft of productivity boosting competition reforms in the 1990s. That was things like reforming retail trading hours, ensuring that people could choose their own electricity plan, and removing outdated rules that said when bakers could start baking. Today, the questions are quite different. We're looking at non-compete clauses, occupational licensing, planning and zoning reforms, and constantly thinking, what are the rules that have acted to gum up the economy and how do we get them reformed and so new businesses can start and thrive and compete with the majors, and we don't just get this ongoing process of consolidation in which monopolies then slow down the rate of growth for the economy.
So it has been a pretty busy time for competition policy. We've had this new kind of competition review and a fair bit of legislation to deal with some particular issues. What are your highlights from the last 3 years? You may have just mentioned some.
Yeah, announcing the end of non-compete clauses for 9 out of 10 workers, which will kick in at January next year, is really important. We've now got a fifth of Australian workers who are bound by a non-compete, stopping them from moving to a better job or starting a business of their own. Removing that impediment will add hundreds of dollars a year to the average wage. And is comparable to tax cuts in the terms of the benefits that it brings. It's also, of course, incredibly important for productivity in the economy. The merger reform shake-up, which the Treasurer shepherded through, biggest reform to our merger laws. These issues had been talked about since the 1960s, as a couple of co-authors and I went through in a recent article. There had been many stumbles in the decades leading up to it, and we're able to tackle it through a really terrific reform process of a competition task force operating within Treasury. Not the standard way in which economic reform's been done in Australia, where you ask a couple of grey-haired eminences to go off and write a doorstopper report, but instead iterative database, data-focused reform run within Treasury, engaging with stakeholder groups as we did it.
And going back briefly to the non-competes, do we have any further details of that proposal? And when do we expect that to get back in front of Parliament and come into effect?
So we'll have draft legislation out soon with the aim of bringing the reform into effect from 1st of January 2027. We're also consulting on how we should address non-competes for those earning over the high income earner threshold in the Fair Work Act. So what we've said is we'll scrap non-competes for people earning less than $183,100, but for those earning above that, we still need to look at what's the right policy reform. For those people, you can think that maybe the productivity impact might potentially be even higher. Think about somebody who is constrained from starting their own technology company, who might then potentially have gone on to hire a whole lot of people and to shake up an ecosystem. If that person is impeded from starting a new business, then that's got a big hit to the economy. So we're consulting on how best to tackle non-compete clauses for that 1 in 10 workers who are above the high income earner threshold.
Yeah, and the unfair trading practices prohibition seems to be slightly ahead of that non-compete process, at least on goal difference, perhaps.
Yep, so that's before the Senate at the moment. I don't speak Senate, but I'm optimistic that it will get bipartisan passage through. Certainly, I haven't heard anyone saying, well, what we've really got to do is have more subscription traps, more drip pricing, and more unfair trading practices in Australia. Instead, you just hear stories from people about how they're frustrated by being able to easily sign up for a subscription, but finding it hard to get out, annoyed by the fact that drip prices are added at the last stage of the transaction process, and frustrated by unfair trading practices and the way in which that dampens competition, because it means that a good business that isn't engaged in unfair trading practices finds itself competing with other firms who are.
And there's been quite a long consultation period through various reports and inquiries. And I guess the detail is really what matters in this kind of prohibition. How has the approach evolved over the years?
Yeah, so we had consultations going back a couple of years. We've had really good engagements with the sector, made absolutely clear that people will still be able to offer subscriptions, but the basic principle is that it should be as easy to leave the subscription as it was to get in. So, of course, you're going to have your streaming subscriptions, your gym subscriptions, your newspaper subscriptions, and the rest. But if you can sign up online, then you should expect to be able to cancel that subscription without having to make a physical trip to the company's offices. And with the unfair trading practices, we've worked quite carefully in order to craft a measure which is in addition to the misleading and deceptive conduct provisions that already exist in the Act.
And when do we think that may take effect?
So that aims to take effect from the 1st of July 2027. So basically, we've got a year's transition period. And now we're also looking at expanding those unfair trading practices provisions to small business and considering whether expansion to financial services is appropriate. So we're doing that consultation in parallel with the legislation going through Parliament, hopefully soon.
And looking at competition policy more broadly, late last year, you and the Treasurer announced that the Competition Task Force Advisory Panel would be extended until next February. What will they be looking at in this added time, injury time, in this period?
They are a cracking group of people. We're very lucky to have their expertise, chaired by Kerry Schott, experts such as John Asker from UCLA, Danielle Wood from the Productivity Commission, Rod Sims, the former head of the ACCC, and having the advice of those experts as we set out a 10-year microeconomic reform plan really is vital. This $900 million productivity fund, which is being used to work with states and territories on pro-competition reforms, is something which I know the Treasurer is immensely proud of. It really is part of our aim to try and get productivity growth going again after a decade in which productivity has languished in Australia, as it has in most other countries, the US really being the only exception there.
Yeah, so the government's announced a revitalised national competition policy with potentially an expanded role for the National Competition Council. And that feels like a bit of a callback to the Hilmer reforms of 30 years ago. What's the focus going to be on there?
We're thinking about having an economy which is more dynamic, in which it's easier for labour and capital to move to its most productive uses. Some of the work that's been done by the OECD, led by people like Dan Andrews, has highlighted the importance of allowing workers to move to more productive firms. That's good for those firms. It's good for the workers themselves, who tend to earn more and have better careers. We also need an insolvency system which is pro-dynamism and pro-competition. So we have a set of insolvency reforms which we're committed to bringing forward. And also just thinking about how we can have a more seamless national economy. So an electrician who lives in the Gold Coast and can pop down to Tweed Heads and do a job without being locked out by an occupational licence rule that effectively stops them at the border. That sort of occupational mobility is good for workers, and it's also good for productivity and growth for the economy.
And there's obviously a focus on AI. What do we expect will be the productivity gains there?
AI is potentially the biggest productivity boosting tool that we have. The experiments with coders and consultants suggest productivity boosts of somewhere between 20 to 40%. That's kind of unheard of, as you know, Matt. Past general purpose technologies have given much smaller bumps and have typically required employers to retool the production process. Think of the way factories had to be re-engineered when electrification came through a century and a bit ago. That's not the case for artificial intelligence, which is being used in interesting ways by workers, often without needing to ask the approval of their manager. So we want to encourage those benefits, but at the same time with the principles that workers should have a voice if artificial intelligence is being imposed in their workplaces. It should be used ethically, and so we're not scraping the content of creatives without their permission, and it should be done in concert with training. So workers should have the chance to be trained up to use the new systems. Sometimes that training can be informal, but providing the opportunities for workers to use it means that we can potentially make this one of the first general purpose technologies that is both good for efficiency and good for equity, which brings up those who are struggling the most in their jobs, and then creates also big gains across the workplace. There's understandably a lot of real concerns about this, everything from the concerns over data centres to the concerns over privacy. So we are, at a government, are committed to getting it right through the National AI Plan and the new AI Safety Centre.
Yeah, as you say, I think a lot of people are excited about the possibilities of AI, but are pretty worried about the risks, including to their own livelihoods. Could you give us an idea of what the government can do to soften the landing here?
Yeah, so the AI Safety Centre is working across different agencies, providing that sort of technical expertise which can complement the policy expertise of particular agencies. To give you an example, we did a review of artificial intelligence in the consumer law, which generally found that the system was fit for purpose. But at the same time, we have concerns over what agentic AI might do. As we send out AI agents, Visa and MasterCard, and through Copilot, we need to make sure that they really are acting in our interests. And just as you would want to know if a physical travel agent was getting a kickback from the airline, so too you want to know if your AI agent is getting an electronic kickback from someone on the other side of the transaction. So I'm giving a talk this week about agentic AI and how that affects the consumer law. We need laws which are broad-based, as much as we can, technologically neutral, and we do need to ensure that workers are brought along the journey. So far, we have not seen significant job losses, and indeed, if you look at an area like radiology, where some of the people like Geoffrey Hinton a decade ago were saying, we're not going to need radiologists in an AI age, they're seeing more demand for their services because AI can help them do a better job in analysing scans. That, to me, is one of the optimistic stories for artificial intelligence, how AI can help make someone more productive and thereby create more demand for their services and allow their wages and their jobs to grow.
Yeah, there was a recent AI model that could turn an article into a pretty decent podcast, as I recall. So you can understand why we might be worried about our future.
Absolutely, yes. It's remarkable on what it can do. Great fun to play with your children. And if you can get AI to make an evening story for them in which they're the starring character, you can see some of the best of the technology. I did an in-conversation event with Anna Goldsworthy, the author of the latest quarterly essay on AI called The God We Made. She had a lovely tale about her kids being interested in different sources of the English language. So they got a poem and they got the AI engine to rewrite it using Anglo-Saxon words, then Norman words, then Norse words. And then all of them had a chat about how the poem sounded different according to these different language-sourced words. That, to me, is AI augmenting human connection, and we need more of that kind of use.
Yeah, we spoke briefly about Anna's quarterly essay last podcast. She's an old friend of mine as well. Great essay.
Really is.
And when we've got the Pope warning against the impact of AI on humanity, Anthropic is saying, let's slow down before we find ourselves in a kind of Terminator scenario, and Tony Blair saying it has to be full speed ahead, who is supposed to believe? I mean, Anna Goldsworthy, obviously, but who else?
Yeah, I mean, I think Anna's piece is nice for a couple of reasons. I appreciate her approach in saying that we shouldn't be too dogmatic about this, that there is a lot we don't know. We should remain curious, but we also need to be on guard against the catastrophic risks in particular. You survey AI experts and ask them, after the systems exceed human capacity, what's the chance that humanity ends? And you get numbers in the order of 5%. I don't know about you, but I wouldn't get on a plane with a 5% chance of crashing. So we do need to get that number down. And the work that the AI safety institutes are doing and the global AI safety summits is a step towards that. At the same time, those principles before about providing workers a voice, providing training, and ensuring the systems are used ethically really underpin the way in which the Australian government is thinking about AI.
And getting back to the World Cup, we're well into it now, but there's been some concern not only about the price of tickets, but also the unfairness that can come from dynamic pricing and maybe not even knowing where your seat might be when you buy your ticket. What kind of protections do we have in Australia against these issues, and should they be improved?
Yeah, we certainly don't want those kind of practices here. And I've been troubled by some of what I've read about happening overseas. We have, as you know, the existing prohibition on misleading and deceptive conduct. We will put in place a new prohibition on unfair trading. So that will prevent conduct which manipulates consumers or unreasonably distorts decision making. And that manipulate or unreasonably distort test will then be another test which the ACCC can use to take action alongside misleading and deceptive conduct. So if you've got conduct that aims to confuse people, to create false urgency, or interfere with genuine choice, then that can be caught. That may well catch instances of harmful dynamic pricing. And if those prohibitions aren't enough, then we're willing to bring fresh legislation in. We've been a strong consumer and competition reforming government. We've increased the penalties. We've brought in a ban on unfair contract terms. We have put in place prohibition on supermarket price gouging, revamped the Food and Grocery Code of Conduct, tackled shrinkflation. We're not shy in taking on competition problems where we see them across the economy, and we'll act if we see markets failing here.
Well, we're all barracking for the Socceroos against the US. I think we've got the better competition policy here in Australia right now. So we'll see if that translates into victory on the field.
Competition on the field and competition in the economy are two things that I think Australians are passionate about. Sometimes we ask ourselves, why is it that when you go into a sporting contest, you've got a dozen different teams to choose to cheer for, but when you go into the market, you've only got a couple of suppliers? I would like it if more of our markets had the range of choices that you see in AFL or Super Netball or the other terrific sporting competitions in Australia.
Well, imagine if there were 48 teams for everything.
It'd be nice for consumers to have more choice. We know that's good for driving down prices. And it's also good for innovation and for people being able to have fulfilling careers, which allow them to move from firm to firm. So more market competition really is the way to a more dynamic economy.
For sure. Dr. Andrew Leigh, thanks for your insights today, and thank you for joining us again on The Competitive Edge.
Real pleasure. Thank you, Matt.
What a great interview. I thought you were quite the playmaker when it came to the sporting metaphors, but he countered at the very end.
I did feel a bit like Curacao out there.
Well, they did score against Germany, although Germany got 7.
Yeah, that's about how it felt to me.
Yeah, well, that said, Matt, that's the same score Germany beat Brazil by in the 2014 World Cup semi-final. Remember that? So Curacao can now count themselves on par with Brazil's performance at a home World Cup.
Let's go with that. So Dr. Leigh spoke about the unfair trading practices prohibition, which looks like it's pretty close to passing. And the Senate Economics Legislation Committee should have reported back by now after getting a brief extension.
They must have wanted to see how the Socceroos went before making any decisions.
I'm pretty sure that's it. But I do wonder if they might want to put their stamp on the final bill, since there has been a lot of interest and some pretty strong views from various sides.
Yeah, even if nobody's asking for more subscription traps, more drip pricing and more unfair trading practices.
True. And as Dr. Leigh said, at the moment, the unfair trading practices ban is only intended to cover consumers, but they're also looking at extending that to small businesses when they're acting like a consumer or dealing with other businesses.
And on non-compete clauses, they're looking at workers making more than that Fair Work High income threshold of around $183,000.
Yeah, so there's still a fair bit to be finalised. But before we go, the US Department of Justice has just announced that the new head of its antitrust division will be Stanley Woodward. and he'll replace Omid Sefi, who replaced Gail Slater, who replaced Omid Sefi. But he was always acting Assistant Attorney General.
So there's been a bit of turnover at the DOJ recently, but the important thing for us is that along with ACCC Commissioner and kind of podcast guest Luke Woodward, there are now 2 Woodwards at the highest levels of the world's competition authorities.
Yeah, and there's also an Assistant Director, Mark Woodward, at the FTC's Bureau of Competition.
This reminds me of an old joke. Why does Edward Woodward have so many D's in his name?
Oh, because otherwise he'd be Ewa-woo-wa. I love that joke.
Well, we could also ask, how much would a Woodward would if a Woodward would?
It's buffalo, 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 all over again.
Not again. Maybe it's time we invited Luke Woodward back on the show. Remember, you can find relevant links in the show notes or email us at edge@gtlaw.com.au.
And if you enjoyed today's episode, please subscribe, leave us a review, and tell your friends.
Till next time, this was The Competitive Edge with Gilbert and Tobin.